Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we've got a very important guest to me. It's my actual accountant. Now I've been with this accountant for 8 years. So 8 years ago, I was trolling the internet trying to find an accountant because of the daunting task of submitting taxes to HMRC. And I come across a very professional looking website. After reading about it, a quick phone call to the person who owned the website, I decided to go with this accountant. So I'm going to let him introduce himself now. I'm going to ask a series of questions. Now, a lot of the questions I already know the answer to, but I'm doing it for the benefit of you guys. Okay, so Paul, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your background.
So I'm Paul Taylor. I trade as an accountancy service provider under PBT Tax Solutions, and I have a product called Taximanager. And I used to be part of HMRC, worked there for 34 years. And then I had the opportunity to do something different, although I ended up choosing to do the same, which is obviously taxi accounts. But I was doing it from the other side of the fence. So I realized that a lot of the taxi and private hire industry, they used to sort of struggle a little bit with their accounts. So I decided to try and develop a system, which is the Taximanager app, which is hopefully proving a godsend for my clients and users, and that's how it was born. It was just my experience from HMRC, realizing that quite often it was uh, jottings on the back of a fag packet, so to speak, and I wanted to get something a little bit more bespoke, and that's how it developed, and that's been going on now for in our 15th year.
You're on your 15th year.
Yeah,
I've only
yeah,
been with you the 8th, but you're on the
yeah,
15th.
yeah.
Right. Okay, so they've been saying at at the beginning of this year that all app-based taxi programs such as Uber or app-based taxi places such as Alpha and Delta, which are the local firms, have to then submit our earnings as a taxi driver to HMRC. Can you tell us a bit about this and what it means for us, or
Right. I think first of all, to try and get a little bit of clarity on the subject,
yeah,
there's still a lot of talk about making tax digital. And that was going to be launched this coming, last April. And they got so far behind with it that they decided to push it back 2 years. Then they moved the goalposts again, which is not um, rare for HMRC, but they then are talking about a turnover limit. So this isn't yet published, to my knowledge, but they were talking about those that had a turnover of over £50,000 would have to use the making tax digital system. And all that is really designed is to get your tax money that bit quicker. Because at the moment, there's a long delay between earnings and the government getting the tax. But for a lot of taxi drivers, they are trading under a £50,000 turnover. So they probably will not fall into the making tax digital. So the correlation between um, reporting your income to HMRC, whether it be through Uber, Bolt, all the various apps, to my knowledge, and I'm saying this at the moment because it's still being written and being clarified, is not mandatory. What will be mandatory, as is always, is that the the client, the taxpayer, the driver, whatever you want to call that person, has got a responsibility to get their information across to HMRC. And that is where I believe we are at the moment. So, making tax digital, there was a lot of media coverage on the TV. If you probably are aware, it all went very, very quiet. and it will be interesting to see what happens in the next 12, 15 months.
Okay, well, a lot of the Uber drivers have already received emails from Uber stating that our tax, our national insurance number has to be submitted to them because as of April this year, any earnings, sorry, January this year, any earnings that we do, they have to tell HMRC so that it corresponds with our NI.
Yeah, yeah. So what will happen when the self-assessment return is completed? What you will find, or as an accountant, using the system to submit the self-assessment return, there are certain pages that become populated with figures. So, for example, the best example is people who receive state pension, who are still driving, or people who are in employment and they are driving as a second income. When you come to do the self-assessment return, on occasions, and not on every occasion, you will see a figure that already comes up on the return. So this tells me, from my experience, that one system has talked to another system. And this is always the problem with an organization like HMRC, is getting the various softwares for big payers to integrate with the HMRC system. So you'll find that pension details, sometimes employment details, are already populated. So because of the changes with Uber now theoretically employing the driver, I think what Uber are then doing is they will be submitting the information to HMRC, and this will be linked to the national insurance number and or the unique tax reference number known as the UTR.
Yeah.
And then that will probably show the gross figure that will go through to HMRC. But as we all know, that's just the starting point.
Yeah.
Because even though they have changed the status of the driver to an employee as such,
It's
that
worker is the status is classed as work.
worker, is that the status that they say, a
That's the
worker?
status we are. So we're classed as a worker, but the for tax reasons we're self-employed. That's how they're coming
Right.
across. So we're not quite an
Yeah.
employee, even though we have all the employee benefits such as holiday
Yeah.
pay
I
and
think I
things like
think
that.
that, yeah, that has been a plus for the driver, because that there are now employee benefits and certain protective rights. But as we all know, self-employment is a risk. You invest your time and effort in a particular activity. So where a driver has got to buy a vehicle, lease a vehicle, and they've got the associated costs, that will always be a deductible expense. It won't matter whether you are self-employed or technically employed. If they integrate you more into the PAYE system just for the national insurance side of things, you will still be able to claim an expense or the expenses of running your vehicle and other associated expenses.
Okay. So you mentioned the taxi app. Now I'm fully familiar with it because I've been using it for 8 years. Can you give us a brief description on how that works on your website, what type of things we can put on it and so on?
Yeah, the first thing I want to point out is that Taximanager is a protected web app, and this information is not linked to any HMRC system. So nobody looks at your data other than yourself, the user, or the people at Taximanager, any of the team that are responsible for doing the self-assessment return. And so what this app does, we've tried to keep it simple. You've got your streams of income, and then you've got expenses. And we've split the expenses up into both motor expenses, which is the core expense which hits every taxi driver. And then we've got other associated expenses, such as mobile phones, equipment, some subsistence, licenses, and we've categorized them. And we do it as just to remind people that there is a category of expenses, and we provide an expenses help link just so that somebody can click on that and think, well, can I claim this? Can I claim that? Because a lot of people just don't realize what they can claim. So we've tried to streamline it and make it easy within the app.
Right? So it's app based. We log into it daily basis, weekly basis, or whenever, and then fill out the earnings for the days that we've done, and then the expenses that coincide with the correct dates, and this all gets logged on to the taxi app.
It does, yeah, yeah. That's it. And using the Uber example, as you're paid weekly, then all you need to do is enter the income, not necessarily on a daily basis, because you will already have what is effectively an audit trail with your own Uber app information, independent of Taximanager. So you will get that payment sent to your bank account, and because things have moved a lot from cash, you will no doubt be purchasing your fuel or covering any costs by way of card, bank transfers. And so at that point, it is down to the client as to whether they want to record that everything for that week, or whether they're going to leave it till the end of the month. That's their choice.
Right.
My recommendation is if they can keep to possibly monthly, it's not an arduous task at the end of the year. And the other thing is what we try to do is we try to track that income in another section of our Taximanager app called the rolling tax screen, which will give the user an idea, and it has to be an idea because in self-employment things change. It gives them an idea of what their potential tax bill is likely to be. And that's something that we're quite proud of, because there's nothing worse than letting everything get behind. You've no idea what your tax bill is going to be. And then you feel as a self-employed person that you're working for the tax man for years to try and play catch up.
So, well, that's a good point because when I log into my taxi app, I see a very simple overview. It says, me takings, me expenses, and then I've got me tax, rolling tax, which will tell me roughly how much my tax is going to be at the end of the year or to put it away, that type of thing. So it's not such a big shock at the end because a lot of people do wonder how much tax am I going to pay, where your app automatically does this and gives you a rough idea of it on your overview page straight away just by logging in.
Yeah, I mean, my career spanned with HMRC. I did the horrible job of what was known in those days as collector of taxes, and we used to have to literally go around and knock on people's doors and chase the tax bill if they hadn't paid it on a voluntary basis, and that's not a nice job to do. Someone had to do it. The styles of how you do it, and I again realised that planning for your tax bill is key. If we've all been employed at some point, we know the tax is deducted, and you don't even think twice. And you could get somebody on a living wage these days, and they're paying, I don't know, £4,000 or £5,000 a year tax. That at the end of the day takes some saving if you are not making provision for it. And
It does.
there's nothing worse than having to carry on working when you're paying last year's or the year before's tax bill because you never seem to get in front.
Yeah.
That's my experience looking at it from both sides of the fence. And I always, as you probably know, when you get the email telling you what's due and when,
Yeah.
we always have a link to recommend that you can pay by direct debit as well. You can't pay arrears by direct debit unless you've got an agreement with HMRC, but you can pay future payments. So really, if your tax bill is £5,000 in a year, then quite simply do a direct debit for £100 a week. And then when it comes to the end of the year, you've covered it.
You've covered it.
And that is always a recommendation because there's no magic wand. At the end of the day, if you've earned the money and the tax has got to be paid, if you've made provision, it makes your mental health better as well because you're in a better place having had it set aside. And the other thing that I have to say, much as the tax man gets a kicking, they're quite an honourable. They are quite an honourable organisation. If you've overpaid tax, particularly in self-assessment, when we do the return, if you overpay tax, you can get that tax repaid probably within 14 days of the return going in.
Right.
And I don't think people realise that. The other thing is, and this is important for keeping your records up to date by way of getting everything submitted to us as soon as possible after April, is that payments on account, and that's another subject matter, but payments on account kick in. Nobody likes them, but you've got a sort of sabbatical when you first start as a self-employed person, where you might not pay your tax for nearly 20 months, but then you're playing catch up. So if you have a bad year, and COVID is a very, very good example, that people weren't earning during that dreadful time, they were able to then submit their return and reduce what is known as the payments on account because the system had calculated, well, if you earned £25,000 last year, you're going to earn £25,000 this year and the year after. Yeah. So we want our money a little bit quicker. But if something goes wrong and sometimes you have people that they change the vehicle or they've had to replace the engine that's affected their profit, then as soon as we know about it, we can reflect that in the following year's payment on account and sometimes get it reduced. So again, the whole ethos of the system, as far as I was concerned when it was built, is to help the driver, help the driver plan and not get himself or themselves in a position, a bad financial position.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've been using you for 8 years, and I come back every year and carry on using you because it's just so straightforward and simple, the taxi app. Now,
That's good to hear. Yeah, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that if someone's new, then you've just mentioned it can be up to 20 months before they have to pay any taxes and stuff. So if someone's brand new, can you help them register on HMRC and
Yeah, yeah. One of our products, which is the we call it the Taximanager Pro. So if somebody signs up and they want us to complete their self-assessment return, the first thing that we need is their unique tax reference number. Now you'll see when they're setting out their personal details. Again, this is all is very confidential. It remains within the app. We ask a question about their unique tax reference number. We jump on it straight away because what we don't want is somebody who buys the app, hasn't registered, and then we come along in a year's time to do the return and we find they've not even been registered. So the first thing we do is we explore whether somebody has got a tax reference number. So if they're coming to us on recommendation, which we get, they've already got a tax reference number, we have to go through a very simple process of getting an authorization from HMRC, which then allows us to submit the return. We can't just do it based off the app. you need to give us permission as a user. And then we then complete that process. If we find that somebody hasn't got a unique tax reference number, 9 times out of 10, the reason for that is they haven't registered. And
Right.
we then say, right, we'll register you. And we just do it as on a complimentary basis. We need to set the return in motion for what it takes. There's a quick email, an exchange of information of when you started, your national insurance number, name and address, and then we submit that to HMRC. HMRC then send the client a tax reference number, this famous UTR, and then from that point, we then get the authorization. Once all that's done, you don't have to even worry about it because you're in the system and you let us take care of you.
Yeah, so that's good. So you can do it from scratch with people you're able to help them. If
Yeah,
um if somebody already has a job and is getting a payee and already in a line of work and they do Uber on a casual basis, does things get complicated then, or is it straightforward still?
it's still very, very straightforward because if they've got a job elsewhere and they're under pay as you earn, then that side of things, the tax is already deducted.
Yeah.
And then somebody wants to go and work in the evenings, for example, with the likes of Uber, and they literally just set up as being self-employed. So it's a second activity. It means that they have a self-assessment to do. So it's the same set of rules. The only difference is that at the end of the year, we would ask them for the P60 because the self-assessment is a summary of the tax, your total income and tax that's been deducted. That's taken into account. You're not taxed on it twice. It's just taken into account within the arithmetic, and then we submit that. So it's still straightforward. The only thing that we ask is if somebody is uh, wanting to track what their tax bill is, because they've had allowances given elsewhere in their main source,
Yeah.
we suggest that they use the tool that we have, which is called the percentage adjustment, and they just advise us whether they're a 20% taxpayer or a 40% taxpayer. If they click that, then it will track again what we think their tax bill is likely to be. So we've
So even if I
got it
even if
covered
I
both
have
ways.
sorry, even if I have a job, a regular job somewhere else, your taxi manager will adapt to that and then still give me a possible outcome of what my tax is going to be. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yeah. To be honest, we've got a lot of users who are in London, and I have to admire their work ethic because there's some people who have got what I call a significant salary,
Right.
and they're going out and they're working again, driving, for example, Uber. And so these are sometimes already 40% taxpayers.
And they're
So
still
that
going
will
out
give you
and
an
doing a bit of
indication of
Uber.
how much they're earning, and yet they want to go out and earn more.
Wow. Right. When it comes to receipts and bank statements, do I have to send them all over to you and keep,
No,
that?
no,
No.
no, no. The premise is anything that you're wanting to claim as an expense, you keep the evidence, you keep the receipt. In fairness, sometimes receipts get lost, but the beauty these days, and the classic one used to be petrol receipts that would get lost.
Yeah.
But again, this was all in the cash trade. But if people are getting paid direct to the bank, generally they're using a card when they go to fill up. So if they've lost the odd receipt, this is where the beauty is. If you record everything on a month by month basis, you can go back to your bank statements when they come in, and you can see where you've bought fuel. Enter that down in the app, and then hopefully retain the receipt. But it's not a huge crime if you've lost the odd receipt, because
Right.
at the end of the day, it is correlated with your income, because there are certain ratios of expected expenses that HMRC would expect in respect of fuel, although that's now getting even more difficult because you've got petrol, diesel, hybrids, electric vehicles,
Yeah.
all will have different ratios. Going back to the old school, a black cab in London would get £6 for every pound of fuel. So based on every
So
pound of
every
fuel,
pound a black cab in London,
so going back in the
HMRC would
day,
expect six
there was
pound
a
profit.
ratio of six, yeah, ratio of 6 to 1. But that's now gone out of the window because everything's moved on.
Yeah.
But there are so in answer to your question about keeping receipts, there are sometimes ways of countering a situation when some receipts have been lost.
Right. So
But
you're still able
hopefully
to work out various different
it
things
can be done.
on ratio.
And one of the things that we do is before the return goes in, and this is down to experience, and this is something we're quite proud of because we know that not every accountancy setup would do it. Is we will glance at everything and we will sort of risk assess. So if we see some figures that don't look right, we will actually take the time to contact the client and say, we've noticed this, that figure seems low or that figure seems high. Can you explain it? So we don't just lead you like a lamb to the slaughter. We try to monitor what's going on because we just want to provide a good service. So our experience comes into play there.
Yeah, you've just stole one of my future questions. Now, I know in the past, I mean, without going into too much personal detail about my circumstance, Paul has contacted me in the past and gone, do you want to explain this figure to me? It doesn't look right. So I can confirm that his organization does actually do that. Speaking about certain expenses, Paul, a couple of me members on the YouTube channel have asked specific things. Are you okay if I give you a couple of these?
Yes, yeah,
So someone's asked whether union fees is deductible by expenses.
right. If you're part of a union, which is, in my view, quite rare,
I'm actually
because
in a union. I'm in a union myself personally,
right,
which is a
so
taxi registry.
it's a representative body.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, so those would be an allowable expense.
Yeah. So you can actually. That's
Yes,
something I'll have to update my app with because it's not in
you
it.
will. You will. Yeah,
So that was a good question. Thanks for
it
that one
was. Yeah,
from the member there.
yeah,
But yeah, there is there's two that spring to mind where they are a representative body, proper official union, and I am part of them and pay a union fee specifically
yeah,
for working Uber.
yeah, yeah,
Right. Okay. I wasn't aware of that. So thanks for that question.
yes.
And is what about meals, drinks? Somebody else has asked. What about your food when you're on the road?
This is the biggest grey area that you can bring up a subject on
Oh dear.
because it's very subjective. So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
You have a local driver, and he's virtually within 5-10 mile radius of where he starts work. Doesn't seem to go out of that area.
Okay.
Could be 20-25 miles, relatively short journeys. The unfortunate thing there is HMRC's view would be that there's no expense that can be set off against your profit. Very similar to if you were an employee and you need to go out and buy a sandwich and a drink, you need to eat, and that's not going to be deducted from, you can't claim your tax back through PAYE. But there are different circumstances. So if you have um, journeys that take you, and I'm talking about significant journeys. So you're in an area of the country and you need to go to an airport, take someone to an airport, and it's say it's a 6 hour round trip.
Okay.
If you can make a note of that trip, then you would be able to claim for your expense. So if you've called at a motorway service station, bought a meal and a drink, get the receipt, by the fact that it will no doubt have the location of where you have bought that expense, incurred that expense, that in itself is an audit trail that shows that you were at such and such a services at such and such a time. And whilst all your individual fares are not necessarily shown on the app, if again you've got a summary from your provider, such as Uber, it might actually show on it where you've been.
It would,
And
yeah.
what we have to work on the basis that you can self-assess whatever you want, but you've got to work on the basis that if HMRC do a review, do a check, then you want to try and have it right. Because if you are found to have done something wrong, they can assume that you've done it wrong in previous years. And that's what we don't want to get involved with, where they're trying to recover duties going back several years. So it's a case of being methodical and sensible. I've had people contact me and they've said, I've got a driver on the rank. He gets his McDonald's breakfast in the morning. He gets something else at lunchtime. And then when he's on his way home, he gets a doner kebab. And I've said,
Why
right,
not?
that'd be lovely. I said, but you can't do it as a tax deductible item on a carte blanche basis.
Yeah.
But if that person, for whatever reason, had done a massive airport run very early, which had taken him sort of 5 hours or so, and then he's had to go out again, and then again at night, because I have got some clients who just do airport runs. They just do these long runs all the time, and get paid quite well. But in those circumstances, they can claim the expense. But as a general rule, you've got to be out of area. And this is the difficult one,
Yeah.
which, as you can appreciate, is a grey area. You've got to be out of area for several hours where you're not used to where your local pie shop or sandwich shop is. And it's the same policy that an employer is allowed to give an employee a subsistence to cover out-of-pocket expenses if they send them away from their normal workplace. So the taxi driver has to look at their given area as to whether it's their sort of local workplace.
Yeah. So
I don't know if
London
that
to
answers it
Edinburgh,
very
I
well,
can
but
claim something. If I'm just
sorry?
working, I said if I got a big job, say London to Edinburgh, it's
Yeah.
possible.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
If it's just a small, if I'm just working my local area,
Just
forget
jobbing.
it. Just
Yeah, yeah.
take some.
I'd love to, I'd love to say, claim the lot, but
It doesn't
I'd be
work that
doing
way.
the client a disservice if they get checked, and
Right.
it's just not worth it.
What about when it comes to charity donations? Are they something that,
Charity donations actually have an impact, because you will find that if you make a charitable donation, it actually, if you're paying tax, it actually adds in um, a higher amount of tax. So if you've made £100 of a charity donation, you will find in the tax computation that you'll get charged the £25 tax,
Right. So
because
it doesn't help
it
reduce
doesn't
tax.
actually help. It doesn't actually help because if you think about it, the charity ask you a question quite often. Um, do you pay tax? And then they're eager to get that tax back, but but the government want to see that tax paid. So the system automatically recalculates that charity donation.
Right. I wasn't aware of that. That was another
It's a
good
little bit like
question.
shooting yourself in the foot.
It is a bit, isn't it? Yeah. So the last one when it comes to expenses I've got here is pension contributions. Now I'm not
Right.
sure if you know exactly how Uber works when it comes to this, but Uber is a set up a pension for every new person that joins, and they pay the contribution every Thursday into there. Is what they take from us to go with it tax deductible?
Right. It won't be tax deductible in the way that you're thinking.
Right.
There is a section on the return where you can put the tax, sorry, you can put the pension premium. So whatever that figure is, you can enter that in the self-assessment. What that will do is it will only give you a little bit of extra credit if you become a 40% taxpayer.
Right. Okay. So
Okay,
not much in it.
what happens is, in theory, for most self-employed people, if they pay £300 a month to a pension scheme, the pension scheme is actually investing £360 a month.
Right.
So they claim the tax back rather than the relief be given at source to the uh, to the user.
Yeah.
The pension, basically, the government have put the work onto the pension companies, so
Right.
they up the investment.
Right. Right. Next question for you. When it comes to recording me mileage, what's the best way of doing it? Flat rate or actual costs? And can you briefly tell me the difference?
Right. So mileage makes money.
Yeah.
Okay. In the taxi industry, mileage makes money. So you can claim a flat rate, and this is based on the number of miles that you do. You don't claim any other expenses. You just claim sorry, you will have your income and then you'll just claim a flat mileage rate for your expenses, and that covers everything. So generally, that doesn't work out quite as beneficial because it won't take into account depreciation on your vehicle, and certain running costs. So it's very much down to the individual as to whether or not they want to claim this mileage rate. But it's almost a simple way of determining a level of expenses to knock off your income, which
For
then equals
vehicles.
your net profit. So, as you know from Taximanager or the various categories of expense, everything from fuel to repairs to insurance to road fund license, insurance has gone up drastically.
Yes.
And I think personally that by the time you add all these expenses, it far outweighs any benefits of just claiming a mileage rate. A mileage rate is really a bit of a get out of jail easy way of doing things.
So
That's my
it's
view.
much better to go with full expenses then, is what you're saying, rather
I
than the
personally think
mileage
so.
rate.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You spoke there about vehicle, um, the value of it, the
Depreciation.
appreciation. Can you
Yeah,
explain a bit about that? Because a lot
yeah,
of my YouTube viewers don't understand how it works at all.
yeah. Yeah. So when you buy a vehicle, that vehicle will reduce in value. And so we're talking about whether you bought a vehicle on hire purchase, PCP, or whether you own the vehicle outright. That will fall in value over the period of time that you own it or use it for being a taxi. So we then have to follow the rules that are set by the government on what you can claim by way of depreciation.
Right.
Now, for tax purposes, it's known as capital allowances and annual investment allowance. Most people understand the phrase depreciation. So we just need to know the value of the vehicle. We recommend quite often these days send us the agreement. You can quite easily email it, and because we always keep a second admin file for each of the users.
Right.
Um, and then we will then work out what the allowances are. Now, sometimes you use them all up in the year, or if somebody's results have not been particularly good, you can save some of those allowances and carry them forward to another year. So we, again, as part of our risk assessment at the end of the year, we will evaluate what allowances we can claim. Now, the misconception for a lot of people is that if they buy a car on finance and the repayments are £460 a month, you'll often find that they will show those payments in Taximanager, the £460 a month. And it does say on the expenses help guide, you only show the amount of interest. So the interest might only be £60 a month.
I personally have this with you because my vehicle's financed and
Yeah,
my difference in interest is about £70 and 64 pence. Even though my car finance is much more than that,
yeah,
all I can claim against me taxes, you were very clear to me. I think that was one of the things you called me about.
yeah.
That you were very clear to me that all I can actually charge against is
Claim.
the HP, isn't it?
Yeah. So you claim the interest. So the profit and loss is defined where that is classed as a revenue expense. So things like your fuel and insurance, etc., and the interest on your loan is classed in law as a revenue expense. But there's obviously a capital aspect. So you've bought a car for 25,000 on an agreement over 5 years, and you're paying £100 a month interest. So
Yeah.
you claim the interest within Taximanager, but then we've got a great big chunk of capital cost which you're paying through your loan, and it's that figure that we then apply the capital allowances or annual investment allowance as a deduction, which you will no doubt see at the end of the profit and loss account that we send each year. If there's a further reduction for capital allowances, we reflect it there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's great. Hope that clears up that question that was asked by one of my members.
Yeah, and the other question is, or the other consideration is, people will say, "What's better, leasing a vehicle or buying a vehicle?" It to me, it's personal choice.
Well, I've actually got a video on my channel which explains the difference between the three. So you've got leasing, finance, or you've got buying outright. And I
Yeah.
explain the difference in them all of them. Now, I found personally that when you're renting, we're going a little bit off subject, but when you're renting off a local firm that covers the insurance and stuff, can you claim that whole amount back on your
Yes.
expenses? So if
Yes.
I rent a car that has insurance from a local firm, say it's
Yes.
£210 a week, for example, I can claim that whole £210 back against my taxes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Personally, I financed one. I found it better that way for my expenses because it works out a lot cheaper for me personally. But I suppose it is down to personal choice, really, isn't it?
Some people like the comfort that if that vehicle breaks down, they can just hand it back to whoever's providing that vehicle and they replace it,
Yeah.
as opposed to somebody having the vehicle off the road and stressing about the repair. If it's off the road, they're not earning, because sometimes it can be, days in the garage, or if they've got an agreement with a provider that just replaces the car on the day, they haven't got any loss of income.
Yeah. It is down to
They just can
personal
carry. But
preferences.
again, it's personal preference.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned before that you look over, and if you spot a figure that doesn't look quite right, you'll contact the person. What about figures that they may have missed?
Right.
Because what if
Uh,
they
uh,
haven't put it in as an expense, but you know in your head, hang on, you've missed claiming this. For
yeah.
example, office use of owner's office
Yeah.
could be missed by a lot of people.
Yeah. We always pick up on that, and the common ones that we will sometimes contact the user over are no cost for a mobile phone,
People
no
forget to
cost,
put that in,
no cost for cleaning,
right?
no cost for use of home as office,
Yeah,
and sometimes because licenses are paid for over a 3 year. Sometimes some licenses last 3 years,
yeah,
depending on which authority. We think, oh, they've not claimed any of their license costs. Um, then we can pick up on that. So it stares out at us when we are just about to do the return. Sometimes we will put in what are very acceptable estimates, which I think I could defend on behalf of a client.
right. So if a client forgot to put something in, if it you would put an estimated in for that
Yeah,
for
yeah,
them while
yeah.
notifying them, and then it would go through.
A good example of those three: the mobile phone, the car cleaning, and use of home of office, is about £1,000 worth of expenses.
Right,
So quite often the user's forgotten all about it. So we will perhaps add that in because we know it's quite justifiable. Because if you go on some basics, what the government do allow for use of home of office, £10 a week for cleaning a car is not unreasonable. And also for a mobile phone, if somebody's on a £10 a month SIM card, you add those three up and you're close on £1,000 worth of expenses. And we feel that they are acceptable. And generally, HMRC, much as they get a bad press, they are realistic that these are expenses that you're going to incur.
right. Okay, that's good. So, do you solely deal with just taxi drivers? Or if someone's watching this who's not a taxi driver, are they able to contact you about this, or is that solely what you do?
We generally try to keep with taxi drivers, because um, as you can appreciate, we don't feel that our fee is overly demanding on anyone for the service that we provide. Other jobs, other trades probably are less inclined to keep the records in the manner that we would want. It becomes a lot more labour orientated to get a cardboard box full of records sent through the post. But we do take on clients who have a property that they rent out.
Right.
So we will charge extra for that,
I
but
was
we do
just going to
have,
get on to your different levels of Taximanager.
yeah,
So you have three levels of Taximanager Pro. Now I'm your middle level, which is probably your
yeah,
most common one, I imagine, which is Taximanager Pro. Now what
yeah,
that does for me is I give you all my information, you submit it, you send it back. But there's two other levels. There's a basic level at £20, is it? And then
yeah. there's a basic level where somebody will just use the app,
They just use the
and
app
they
for
use it as
bookkeeping
a,
sakes.
it's almost like a spreadsheet in the sky.
Yeah,
So that they will use it, and we never hear from them. They never ask us any questions. They just want a system to use.
they just want
And
a
we have
straightforward,
quite a
easy
lot of people
system.
who use that. The
You do
Taximanager
have
Pro.
clients just on the basis of just using your
Oh,
app,
yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Um, and we also have, as you say, Taximanager Pro that incorporates um, registering somebody for self-assessment, as I've mentioned earlier on,
yeah,
and doing the self-assessment return, providing them with some accounts, all the documents. As you may well recall, we, at the end of submitting the return, we send a copy of the accounts,
yeah.
the tax return, the tax computation, and importantly, the submission document, which shows and takes away any doubt that the return has been actually sent in. We send all those documents electronically back to the user. Um, that
And what
makes
was
us feel happier,
the cost of that was
and
100
that's
quid,
£129.
which works out about £2.50 a week
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
have peace
I
of
don't
mind from
think
your tax,
I don't think people on the high street would even open the door to you. Um, we do have a higher level,
right?
which we introduced, um, and that's really to cover where we might have extra work to do. So, for example, we do get some clients and they're seeking a mortgage.
Right.
So we quite often have to correspond with a mortgage broker. Um, so that takes more work. It's more bespoke to the person, to the client. So we will include that in part of the Taximanager Pro Plus package.
Right.
Um, and also what we have done there is it's not insurance because you are forbidden to sell it as insurance. It's what we call a hire service.
Right.
So we undertake that if that return is subject to a tax enquiry, we will cover the extra work involved in dealing with the tax enquiry.
Okay.
And again, that is an opportunity for a client to go that little bit extra to cover in case there's ever an enquiry, because those costs can run into significant figures, and we're not talking just hundreds; they can run into thousands.
Right.
So we designed that package after a few years because we found that people were wanting extra work done, mainly mortgage applications, things like that.
Okay. I mean, I haven't looked at that side of things personally, so it was interesting to find that part out.
Mm,
I use your middle package basically.
yeah.
And I have done for 8 years, guys, and he's not letting me down yet. Right. Now, you say it's app based, it's web based, and it's you can use it on your phone. What about getting in touch with you? Is it just email based? Is the other ways of getting
Well,
in touch with you?
you will find that on the with it being a web app, we have our contact details, and um, we're open to clients ringing us up for advice. Um, it's something which we feel creates that little bit of a personal service for those that need that little bit of extra contact. So that's always a possibility. Emailing us direct, because once you've been with us, or you've been registered by us, you will soon find that the accountancy arm, away from the Taximanager product, which is PBT Tax Solutions, becomes your official accountant.
Yeah.
So Taximanager is really a product so that you can use that in order that PBT Tax Solutions can access that information and then perform everything that's required at the end of the year for the tax return.
Okay. So yeah, and you can even get a YouTuber message you saying, "Do you fancy coming on and doing a video?" I'd like to thank Paul for coming on today, and I hope this answered a lot of your questions, guys. I did have a little section up where I asked you to ask me questions. Thank you very much for the feedback there. Some of your questions did in fact appear. And if you've enjoyed this video, give us a like, give us a sub. There may be another video coming up from Paul in the future, but too many spoilers for now. I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.